What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with another NFL draft team needs video. In this video, the AFC South, from the Texans to the Colts, going through each team's needs and the draft game plan for each AFC South team, the way that I would address each need in the draft, each round, and give a nice overlook for their 2022 NFL draft. If that sounds great, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more BLV NFL draft and NFL content as I cover all 32 teams, including all 4 AFC South teams here on the channel. Also, Gronk, spike that like button for more NFL content and to help me out with the YouTube algorithm. Let's get to the team needs. Let's begin with the Houston Texans. The Texans are clearly, obviously, rebuilding. They need every position. And when you need every position the way that the Texans do, you need to fulfill the biggest, most important positions in your scheme first. You need to have the cornerstones of a NFL roster first, right? Offensively, you need playmakers. You need tackles. You need defensively pass rushers, difference makers. So the Texans have a lot of needs. Their biggest needs, in my opinion, are the edge position. A guy that can get after the quarterback, a big-time pass rusher that can get to the quarterback in Lovie Smith's cover 2 defense. A corner would be very nice. A number 1 corner for the Texans that can kind of shut down half the field would be very nice to have, or take on number 1 wide receivers. Offensive line, certainly, to build that line of scrimmage is going to be big for the Texans. The safety position, after losing Justin Reed, could use some work, and wide receiver outside of Brandon Cooks could still use some work. That is just the tip of the iceberg for the Houston Texans. As I said, they need a lot of stuff. But you look at this roster, and look at the picks. They've got lots of picks. Finally, they are going to be able to rebuild, moving on from Deshaun Watson. And clearly you saw that I didn't have quarterback on the list because Davis Mills is going to be the guy for this year. So that being said, you don't got to worry about that for this year. And I think that's a wise move because this year is not a great quarterback draft. It isn't. So why try to go after a quarterback when Davis Mills played admirably as a rookie? See what he has in his second year. Hopefully you can surround him with some talent, but if not, it's okay. Next year, the year after, you can get your quarterback. It's not a big deal, right? You're not competing right now. You're not competing next year. It's probably going to take 3-4 years for you guys to be competitive. That's just the honest truth, and you need to find those playmakers. So Brandon Cooks at wide receivers around for another couple years. So you got him locked down. I don't think wide receiver in the first round is a huge need, especially in this year's draft where I don't think you're going to necessarily get a all-pro caliber guy every year. There's no Jamar Chase in this draft, in my opinion. So if that guy was there, then maybe. But I don't think you need that in the first round. I think you can look for that in the second and third, fourth. But I don't think you need that in the first round. Offensive line, I think you could look for a tackle. I'm not sure what's going on with Laramie Tunsil for the future there. Feels like his future is kind of limited. Titus Howard was a first-round pick in 2019. Hasn't necessarily lived up to the billing. He's been okay, but I wouldn't say he's been great. So we'll see how long he lasts as well. Interior offensive line could use some work, but I don't think that's a first-round need. It's not a huge position. I think that's going to be another mid-round look, maybe late round. Tight end, it's not a big tight end draft. Running backs, I think, whatever, try to find a late round gem if you can. That's not essential. I think really first round is going to be focused on the defense. I think you're going to focus on Lovie Smith's defense. The edge position certainly could use a big-time playmaker. So that's a position that I think they're going to look to add. I think even interior defensive line is another spot that they could look to add. And then also corner. So those are the spots that I think the Texans are really going to look at. Maybe safety. I don't know. But we'll see. So I just think first round is mostly going to be spent on offensive line, defensive line. Or just defense in general. So That's the way that I would look at it, because the Texans really need to build their defensive line and offensive line. And I would say more essentially for this team, defensive line. And then after that, second, third, fourth round, you can look to add your corners. You can look to add your receivers. So first round, line of scrimmage. Second, third, perimeter playmakers. And then just depth from there on out. And that's really the goal, I think, for the Texans this year. Try to get some foundational players on the line of scrimmage. If you can do that, you can build that for whoever your future quarterback is. That's a perfect start to this regime. That's very Patriot-like if you're Nick Caserio. That's how Belichick began with the Patriots, is finding guys like Richard Seymour, right? Finding guys like Matt Light, those type of guys. I think that is going to be what the Texans try to do. And I really look at what the Jets have done as a great game plan. I know the Jets aren't successful yet, but I think what they've been able to do in terms of compiling talent from a really bad roster to where they are now, they started with the offensive and defensive lines, and so far, so good. I think the Texans need to go there as well. And there's not a big-time quarterback, obviously, so you're not going with the quarterback. That would be the second place, right, is D-line and O-line after the quarterback. And then you could try to get some receivers and some corners after that. Because you're not really in a position in this draft where you're going to get a Jamar Chase, you're not going to get a generational receiver. So I wouldn't look to get the receiver talent. But that's kind of how I see the Texans. You could kind of convince me with most positions, but I think because this team just needs talent, period, you've got to begin on the line of scrimmage, and that's my opinion. Moving to the next team, it is the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts made a big move earlier today. As I'm recording, they signed Stephon Gilmore, which is definitely going to help their corner position, which is going to move their needs around just a little bit. They no longer need a number one corner, which I thought was going to be a pretty big need for them in the draft. Now I look at their corner position as having two really good players, Stephon Gilmore and Kenny Moore, who is their slot corner, one of the best in the game. But I still think they could use a third corner. Is that Isaiah Rodgers? Is he going to be the guy? I'm not sure. Maybe. I mean, he's shown some bright spots. Potentially, he could still be their third corner there. Gus Bradley doesn't typically value corner, or this scheme is not a huge corner scheme. It's more based on D-line. But the D-line is already in a great spot with Yannick Ngakoue, Kwity Paye, Tyquan Lewis. They spent a second-round pick on DN last year. Interior D-line, DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart are good. So, I'm not really worried about that. You could add interior D-line depth as well, but you could also look to free agency for that. So, I think you're stacked on the D-line for the most part. You don't really need to go high priority with that. Linebacker is good, as we know. They've got 2 to 3 good players there. And then really offensively, I think the primary spots where they need to look to add are wide receiver and offensive line. This is the first year in a bit that they have needed offensive line, right? They haven't really needed offensive line in a couple of years since they really got Quentin Nelson that kind of secured their offensive line to be a beast. But really what you have is 3 good linemen and then 2 to 3 question marks. I would say Matt Pryor, I think, has upside at left tackle. So I do think that people that are mocking them tackle are not exactly in the right range. I feel like the Colts could go with a guard. I feel like they could go with a tackle, but I would be a little bit surprised. I think receiver makes the most sense here. You got Matt Ryan. You need a number one receiver. Michael Pittman is a good receiver. I don't know if he's a true number one. He's on the border of number 2, number 1. Tight end's not a strong tight end draft. It's not going to be a first round pick. Could be down the road. Mo Alley Cox deserves a shot to start, but I think you do need depth there. You obviously don't need running back. So really, to me, it's potentially tackle, but for me, more so guard, wide receiver, and corner. Those are the spots that I look at and I say, that's where the Colts need to execute. That's where the Colts need to go in big. Find a receiver, find and secure your offensive line with a guard, and get another corner, and then secure your secondary, lock it down. So I think the Colts are in a really good spot because I think they have 3 or 4 needs that are clear, obvious, and anyone can look at their roster and say, these are the positions they need. This is what we're going to draft. Getting Gilmore's huge because it helps your corner position. I think getting Yannick Ngakoue earlier in the offseason is huge because now you've got an edge rusher on the opposite side of Kwity Paye that you don't need to use that on a high priority pick, right? So they've done a good job already. Safety is another position now that I'm looking that I wouldn't be shocked if they used high priority pick on that, but I wouldn't be like, I don't necessarily think they need to. So Colts are interesting for sure because they're kind of like on that borderline of I'm starting to buy in that they could be pretty good, but I'm not like completely sold. So I feel like the draft is going to sway me either way. Colts fans, let me know where you think you should use your picks. I think it's on mostly the perimeter playmakers of wide receiver, corner, maybe safety, and then also guard and possibly tackle. Let me know in the comment section below. The next team in the AFC South is the Tennessee Titans, the division winner from a year ago and the number 1 seed in the AFC. The Tennessee Titans have more needs, I would say, than a team that's a number 1 seed you would think needs. Now, the interesting thing about the Titans is last year, I felt like I was all about them on defense. Like, I felt like I was like, you got to draft some defense, you got to draft some secondary, all that stuff, right? Now I feel like it's mostly offensive line and offense, really offensive line especially. Now, they drafted a second round right tackle last year that I'm assuming they're expecting to take the starting spot. Reduns is the right tackle. Lawan is left tackle, but he's getting older. So I wouldn't be shocked if they spent a pick high in the draft on tackle and guard. Because guard at left guard especially is highly questionable. Nate Davis is solid at right guard. Ben Jones also is getting older at center, but I don't think that's a right away type thing. Wide receiver, they already addressed with Robert Woods, so I think they're okay at receiver. Maybe they add one in the 5th, 6th, 7th type of deal, but I'm not going to see them really pick a 1st, 2nd, 3rd wide receiver. Running back as well, depth-wise, maybe could add a addition there, but you brought in Jordan Wilkins, I believe, Trenton Cannon, Jontrell Hilliard. I mean, that's not awful. It's not the best depth in the world behind Derrick Henry, but it's not a huge priority. Defensive line, I think you're pretty strong. You could use some depth on the interior. Jeffrey Simmons is good. Danico Autry is kind of a versatile player. Bud Dupree, Harold Landry. Like, I think you're good there. I don't think that's a high priority. You re-signed Harold Landry. You signed Bud Dupree long-term. Danico Autry's still there. So, like, I don't think it's a huge priority. Nose tackle could be a mid-round pick for you. Linebacker, I think you're fine. I'm not in love with your linebackers after losing Jayon Brown, but I think you're solid. Corner, I think you've spent already a ton of capital on with Fulton in the 2nd round in 2020, with Farley, who I really like in 2021. Expect him to play well this year. Elijah Molden in the nickel. I think you're actually shaping up to have a good young secondary with Kevin Byard leading the way. Maybe safety depth could be a look on defense. So nose tackle, safety potentially. And then really I think the high priority picks are going to be offensive line, especially left guard, and maybe tackle, and then that's really where I see them picking. I could see them going 1st, 2nd round. I could see them going guard tackle or tackle guard, like back to back. I could really see that, especially the way that the Titans play with how they're a power run team. So that's what I would expect, and then I think they're just going to fill out the rest for the rest of the draft with best player available. I also wouldn't mind them going with an edge, just to have that extra rotation guy behind Bud Dupree and on top of Bud Dupree and Harold Landry. Just another nice addition there, but that's another like luxury type pick, I think. So Tennessee's interesting. I think mostly they're going to work on their offensive line and then probably their front seven defensively. Let me know, Titans fans, what you think and where you think they're going to use their picks. Jacksonville is the final team here in the AFC South that I want to discuss, the team with the first overall pick. It feels like they're going to pick an edge player. Now, we don't exactly know. I think it's going to be Hutchinson, but we don't exactly know. So let's just assume they get an edge player to go on the opposite side of Josh Allen. That makes their front seven pretty well locked down. I mean, we could see them add a linebacker. They brought in Aluakon, but they lost Miles Jack, right? So I could see them bringing another linebacker in as well. But really, Jacksonville has spent a ton of money in free agency in recent seasons. And they've got a lot of depth, a lot of like kind of unknown players in their front seven, but solid players nonetheless. Like Fatu Kazi, they signed Malcolm Brown, Roy Robertson Harris, Dwayne Smoot, Hamilton. Who else they got? Arden Key they brought in. Like all these guys I think can play a decent role. Secondary, I think they've done a good job restocking. I'm a fan of Tyson Campbell, the second round pick from a year ago. Same as Andre Sisco, who I liked coming out of the draft. Shaquille Griffin and Darius Williams are your number 1 and number 2 corners. And I think Rayshawn Jenkins is solid. Safety, maybe you look to add somebody there. But I think edge rusher is really going to help them to have the 1-2. Linebacker depth and offensive line. So I think it's going to be, for Jacksonville, their most essential positions to add is going to be offensive line of some sort, whether that's tackle or guard, wide receiver, and that edge pick with their first pick. So that's kind of their first 3 or 4 picks. I see them going with edge, tackle, guard, wide receiver. That's how I see it. And then the rest of their draft is going to be probably depth at linebacker, depth at corner or safety. So it's a pretty clear path for Jacksonville. And if they can hit on a couple of those picks, they're in a good spot. I do really still think they need a go-to guy for Trevor Lawrence. I don't think Christian Kirk is that, even though they paid him as such. I think they need another receiver. So that's something to look out for as well. But I really think they need to focus on the edge and the O-line and protecting Trevor Lawrence, maybe before they get that number 1 guy early in a draft. So those are my thoughts on the AFC South, the team needs, my game plan for each team. If you're a fan of one of these teams, let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you thought I did in terms of the game plans and what you like, what you dislike, and where you would go with your team's selections. It's Mitch. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. Gronk, spike the like button and subscribe for more. See you in the next video. Peace.